hotels tend to optimize across room categories and assume that most guests are fairly indifferent between different room types, whereas campgrounds have much more stringent and more inventory attributes that they need to take into account. So to give you a few examples, in a campground you could stay at a tent site, a cabin site, or an RV site. And believe me, guests are not indifferent. If they booked a tent site, more likely if they booked an RV site, they don't want to be sent to a tent site. Even within RV sites, we've got different sites that accommodate different rig length, hookup types, slide outs, location as we talked about on the last slide. So campgrounds really are, some hotel industry folks think of camping as a less sophisticated or less complex version of hotels. I would say in this case, it's actually the opposite. As it relates to inventory optimization, campgrounds are significantly more complex and require a more sophisticated strategy and tool set. So whereas hotels optimize across room types, campgrounds need to optimize their pricing and their inventory controls within site types. This is a topic I'm checking my watch because I tend to drone on and on about this topic. I'm very passionate about it. Overbooking, who's familiar with that concept? Okay, most of the room. So for those who aren't, overbooking is a practice in hotels where you allow guests to reserve more rooms than you actually have available. The reason being, as you get closer to the date of arrival, you're going to have cancellations, you're going to have no-shows, right? So a hotel would look at their historical no-show data, that is reservations that didn't show up at all, and if that's 20%, then they might, anticipating that, they might sell 20% more rooms than they actually have, hoping that by the time they get to the day of arrival, they get what's called a perfect set, and they actually have every room occupied. Now, sometimes they get it wrong, and they're in an oversold situation, which is where more guests show up than they actually have rooms available. But the cost of that, the penalty of that, really isn't that high, because there are typically many other hotels nearby that they can walk the guest to, which means reserve them a room at an alternate hotel that likely has a similar room configuration of 1 bed or 2, and maybe pay their transportation costs or give them some credit. It's not a pleasant situation. Again, I've been the one delivering that news before, and I've also received the news before that there isn't a room available. But it's a common practice in the hotel industry, and it's something that is pretty fundamental to hotel revenue management. Campgrounds, on the other hand, work very differently. For one, we have a longer lead time, so you're not getting as many last-minute bookings, last-minute cancellations. We also typically have more stringent cancellation policies, so if somebody doesn't show up, likely you are going to recoup a good portion of that revenue, unlike hotels which might have flexible cancellation policies. But maybe more importantly is that if you get this wrong, if you end up with more guests showing up to your campground than you have sites available, there probably is not a campground a couple miles down the road that has the identical site configuration that the guests have booked at your property. You might be sending them 50 miles away. And so the opportunity, I would say, for campgrounds to utilize overbooking is lower. The costs of doing it wrong are much higher. And so I strongly recommend against campgrounds using overbooking as a key strategy. Rather, I would encourage campgrounds to think about things like waiting lists and things like more stringent cancellation policies to achieve the same result. And the last key difference that I want to highlight has to do with distribution. So distribution is about where you market your property or where else you allow someone to book your inventory. In the hotel industry, there are a high number of online travel agencies, or OTAs. That's the world I come from, so I have a soft spot in my heart for the OTAs like Expedia, Booking.com, Priceline, Orbitz, etc. Research has shown the average customer booking a hotel visits multiple OTAs before making their purchase decision. And there isn't one OTA that trumps all the others. And so as a hotel, you're somewhat beholden to the idea that you need to list on all of the OTA platforms in order to make sure that you don't miss out on any opportunities to capture a guest who's searching in your area. Hotels typically get a large percentage of their bookings from OTAs. I heard a stat recently that one hotel chain was saying that 70% of their leisure transient bookings came from OTAs. And hotels don't necessarily love this overdependence because in the hotel industry, OTAs charge a fairly significant commission rate, 15 to 25%. And they also have stringent rules such as you can't pass that fee on to the guest. You need to make any room available on the OTA that's available on your site, and you don't get direct access to the guest's email address in many cases. So because of this, hotels generally have a love-hate relationship with OTAs. They know they need to participate. They would love to be able to be less dependent on OTAs. And so kind of the strategy for hotel revenue managers and marketers is what can we do to get away from OTAs and drive more direct bookings? And I think it would be maybe a mistake to think that the same dynamics apply today to camping. So in camping, there are relatively few OTAs, and historically, there hasn't been a number of dominant or very significant OTAs for our industry specifically. Now, Campspot represents one OTA, just to give you a stat there. In 2023, our OTA represented 5% of all the bookings on our platform, which is not insignificant, but it's nowhere near the 70% that some hotels are seeing from OTAs. And so I think the first takeaway here is that we're coming from a different place. Probably the campground industry has more opportunity to leverage distribution platforms like OTAs rather than hotels, which are maybe oversaturated. A lot of campgrounds are looking to participate with the traditional OTAs like Expedia, Booking, Vrbo, Airbnb. And I would encourage them to do that for their lodging inventory, but I would also caution that traditional OTAs don't do a great job of marketing RV sites. So what's the harm in just listing on a lot of different OTAs? That's the tactic in the hotel industry, right? Be everywhere. I think the difference here is that in the hotel industry, it's be everywhere that your customers are. And in the camping industry, the customers are not, by and large, in a lot of these OTAs today. And there are risks associated with listing with an OTA, such as an OTA bidding on your keywords on Google. So if somebody types in the name of your campground, the first result might be coming from the OTA. If they are generating their own content, they might have inaccurate content about your campground. It might not accurately portray your terms and conditions. And then, again, this is dependent on the OTA, but some of them are going to withhold some of the data about your customer and use that data instead to market other campgrounds, which doesn't necessarily benefit you. So I say all of this as an overall proponent of OTAs and as the representative of a company that has a leading OTA in this space. I want to say explore this area with caution. And I think the key question that you would be asking when you're meeting with OTAs is, what value can you provide to my campground? Where is the data on the demand that you have that you can send to my area? And is that incremental demand that would not have gotten otherwise? That's not a question hotels need to ask, because that's a question that's already been answered for hotels. So before we move on to what we can take away from hotels, I just want to summarize these 5 points. First, that campgrounds don't benefit from the large base of corporate and group travel that hotels do, and therefore the marketing and booking and pricing strategy toward leisure guests it's more universal and it's more critical, I would say. Second, site location is an integral part of the booking process, and map-based booking, site lock type features, these are things that don't exist in the hotel world, and people with a hotel background might not appreciate their importance. Third, campground inventory is more complex and less flexible than just one bed or two, and therefore pricing and optimization strategy really needs to take into account what's happening at the site type level, whereas hotels look more at the property level across room types. 4, unrecouped no-shows are rarer. You typically make money if somebody makes a reservation and doesn't show up. So moving, and also moving guests to another property is not really a viable option. So therefore, overbooking is risky and, in my personal opinion, not a great strategy for campgrounds. And finally, 5, OTAs are, at least today, less relevant for campgrounds. And so I encourage campgrounds, instead of being everywhere, to pick the ones that actually have demand rather than the ones that need you more than you need them. These aren't all the differences between the two industries. I know based on the number of hands I saw of people that have come from the hotel industry, you're like, what about this? What about this? So this is just a preview of a lot more content. We're actually putting out a white paper. I partnered with Campspot's Chief Technology Officer, Megan Winfield, who came to us last year after leading a lot of the technology functions at Hilton Hotels. So she has probably an even better perspective than I do. And together we put together this paper on navigating the camping and hotel crossover. This is available today at the link below. We'll be publishing it out probably next week, but you can get it today if you want. And I also want to talk about things that we can learn from hotels. But first, a drink of water. So, learnings from hotels, it's not all bad, right? There are definitely things we can take from other industries. I think the theme here is focus on the why behind the reason hotels do things versus the how. So a few examples of things I think are particularly relevant to our industry. I would say implementing some form of revenue management. Revenue management is the practice of trying to sell the right product to the right guest at the right time and the right price. So that's things like dynamic pricing, length of stay requirements, other inventory controls. I think that philosophy is very relevant to camping. It has all the attributes of an industry that benefits from revenue management. The tactics used in hotel revenue management are not always applicable in campground revenue management. So yes on revenue management, but campground-centric revenue management. Second, utilize online distribution by working with relevant camping partners, and that's not just OTAs. That applies to any listing site or marketing channel. Hotels have done a better job in the last decade than they did in the prior decade of really embracing technology and embracing marketing and distribution platforms. We can learn from that and can also learn from the mistakes, such as the ones I described on the last slide. Third, related to technology, hotels are a lot farther than we are in adopting technology. So I very much think that there's a place for more technology adoption in camping. Of course, if I didn't think of that, I probably would be out of a job. So I'm a little biased in that assessment. What I would say is I think it's really important to look for solutions that were either designed with campgrounds in mind or solutions that you think are truly industry agnostic. And that brings me to the next point. I think one area where there could be some industry agnosticity is self-service automation and Internet of Things. Things like keyless door access and gate access, self-service check-in, self-service editing of reservations. These are features, tools, and functions that are relevant to hotels and also to campgrounds, and I think they'll be increasingly relevant to campgrounds because we typically have lower staffing levels in our industry. And then finally, most importantly, something that's central to hotels, to camping, and to every other hospitality business is that the product isn't your website, the product isn't your reservation system, the product isn't even the cabin or the RV site, the product is the guest experience. And if you keep the guest experience front and center, then you are more likely to thrive regardless of what industry changes occur. So I just wanted to share a few notes as key takeaways before I turn it over to Q&A. I think the first is that because hotels do it, that's not automatically a reason to change the way that you do things in your industry. I would say identify your goals, identify your customers, and let those drive the changes that you want to make. Don't let somebody else convince you that the way you've been doing things is wrong just because another industry does it that way. And especially don't let somebody convince you that if they're trying to sell you something. The second point is to focus on the themes that have been successful in other industries, not the specific tactics. So from my perspective, the themes in the hotel industry that are relevant to our industry would be pricing based on demand, distributing to where your customers are, welcoming technology if it's designed for your industry and your type of business, and prioritizing the guest experience. Third and finally, yes, we have to acknowledge that the campground industry is changing. Don't let change happen to you. You are a campground owner, you know your business and your customers better than anyone else. And you should have a bigger influence on the future of this industry than somebody who is entering this industry more recently. So drive change, don't be driven by it. But I'd love to hear from you. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts or areas that maybe were a little unclear? I will in just a moment. Yep, absolutely.
No, I want it now.
You want it now? So you're an example of a hotel guest. And I'll also leave some cards on the table here. If people don't want to take a picture of it. Yes. Let's see, is there another microphone? Let's just have people shout. I saw a hand over here.
This question might be more for the room, but one of the recurring themes I keep hearing today is this thought of automating check-ins, right? So people can go directly to their campsite and never have to check in. I'm curious if this has reduced store revenue because it's not forcing the guests to come into the store to see what inventory you have, and I guess just thoughts around that.
That's super interesting, and I guess first, can I get a show of hands? Who offers some form of self-check-in at your campground? And keep your hands raised if you feel like it has an impact on the camp store sales. Okay, so maybe somewhat. I think one thought I would add here is that this is an example of maybe the guest preference is changing to wanting more of a self-check-in, contactless interaction, or less interaction when they check in. You're probably not going to be able to stand in the way of that changing guest preference, but you can possibly adapt to it. So one thing, for example, that we're focusing on a lot at Campspot is investing in the add-ons capabilities when people are booking a site or editing a site, giving them the opportunity to make some of those purchases that they would otherwise make in person. I know a lot of the other reservation systems also do that, so again, I'm not trying to plug Campspot specifically, but I think offering more, so if there's going to be self-service check-in, I think there also needs to be self-service camp store purchasing available.
I would want to ask her, is at check-in the only time they find their way into your camp store?
No, not typically, but for some, that might be the only time that we see them, you know, and they might say, oh, I really like that shirt, and so it's like, if I implement this, am I possibly losing that shirt sale? Because I could see adding on firewood, adding on ice, you know, but am I gonna do add-ons for every different style of merchandise I have? You know,
I think I would
that's
just
the question.
evaluate what that real percentage is of people who don't ever come back to the camp store. You know?
And I would add, is that person who's doing the self-check-in, are they gonna come to the store at all, right? Will you lose that revenue if you're not offering self-check-in? So your addition is, are you collecting the guest who wants that experience?
All right.
Who doesn't wanna talk to anybody, who wants the expediency, and so you're getting your site revenue as opposed to ancillary, but maybe that's the enhancement. And the add-ons, we use the add-ons with Campspot all the time, you know, golf carts, and firewood, and ice, and then we also use texting, you know, to supplement, you know, hey, you got a special on t-shirts and that kind of stuff, which helps collect them back to the store if they want.
Well, I have to admit, she has a valid point, because it used to be 100% of the people who came into the camp store to register.
Right, and also may have to use that, may not have to come to you because you didn't have self-check.
Absolutely. I'm not disagreeing with you.
Right.
Well,
I'm just saying that she has a valid point.
And I think this is the exact kind of debate that needs to be happening about how campgrounds operate. Because if we had this same discussion with a room full of part campground people, part hotel people, hotels might have a completely different solution to the problem that you're describing. I don't have a solution here. I think we can all agree that the guests that we're attracting at our campgrounds is increasingly looking for more self-service and automation, and that has other implications on things like camp store sales that might be initially negative. We need to solve that problem. I don't have a solution today other than some of the add-ons we're talking about, but that's where I think the conversation needs to start, not be, oh, plenty of hotels have self-check-in and they're fine, let's just not worry about it, right?
Well, I think you just don't want to impede on the culture, right? As long as you
Sure.
don't do that, then camping is a social culture, and they're going to find their way to the store. They're going to find their way to each other. They're going to talk about, oh my God, I saw the best T-shirt in the world over there, and yeah, you didn't check in, you have to go check that out. That's what happens in campgrounds, right?
Yep.
And which you were talking about the customer that might not ever have gone in there, and that's a hotel customer, really, right? Because well, even yeah, I mean maybe some glamping, but that's the thing. In hotels, you don't really want to mingle with the people that you're there with, right? I like to use this sort of antidote that if you go, and you guys have had this experience, right? You go into a hotel, you check in, you go to the elevator, you get in, and you start pressing the close button because you don't want someone else in with you. And even if they come in with you, you don't make eye contact. You stand there, you stare at the floor, the wall, or the mirror of yourself, and then you run to your room. But you guys know this too. If you're in a campground, you wake up in the morning, you make a cup of coffee, you step on your stoop, you get a cup of coffee in your boxer shorts, and you look 10 feet away, and there's somebody on their stoop in their boxer shorts having a cup of coffee, and that's welcome. It's not weird.
When was the last time you knocked on the next room of the hotel and asked if you wanted to share a beer? I think that'd be a little happier. Good conversation. I want to capture some of the other questions. Alyssa, I saw you at the back. Hello, by the way.
Hi, Michael. Hi, my name is Alyssa. I'm the founder and CEO of Camp. And Mike, I love that you see an opportunity for camping with OTAs. Probably that's where this is going. So from the data we have access to, the camp is the leading OTA in this space. We got 20 million unique campers this year. Leading camp access gave us data saying we're driving 3 times as many bookings to campgrounds as any other OTA. And so I'm curious if you see the opportunity here, and NewBook is doing this, Rest Access is doing this, RMS is doing this, Rovercraft is doing this. Why isn't Campspot letting Campspot hosts list out other OTAs? Just curious.
So I promised this wasn't going to be a presentation about Campspot, and I'd love to continue the conversation as we've started other times, Alyssa. I think what I would say here, and probably what's also guiding Campspot's philosophy, is campgrounds are the ones that are going to dictate what technology investments are, or what technology solutions emerge in the industry. And to the point about looking for campground-centric vendors with campground-centric expertise, that's why, because campground-centric technology solutions and products are built with input from actual campgrounds. And so I'm going to take the question more broadly and say, I believe that OTAs have value. I think HipCamp has value. I think others have value. And you as a campground operator need to decide if there is sufficient value for your campground in your market with data. And if that's something that is a priority to you, you need to communicate that to your respective technology vendors. So I know that's not a satisfying answer, and again, I think this is more of a individual conversation for us to have, but I think it does kind of underscore the point that we're a unique industry, we have a unique product set, and there's not a one-size-fits-all solution. I'm gonna go over here.
Since COVID, there's been a lot of new RVers traveling, and they're not as familiar with the ways that campgrounds and RV parks are different from hotels. How would you recommend that RV parks navigate those customers who they just went online, grabbed a site, and then they get there and discover that, oh, they should have read all of the stuff on the site because it's not a hotel.
Yep.
And we don't have all of the amenities of a hotel with cabins as well.
That's one of the things that we go through in a little more detail in the white paper, which is that because hotels are so standardized, Hilton Garden Inn in one city looks like Hilton Garden Inn in another city for the most part. campgrounds are less standardized. I think we need to do a better job of first having accurate content, but then getting that content out. Before we solve the problem of getting guests to read the website or read the know before you go, we also have to make sure that that's accurate and it has the right information. I've stayed at even some of the largest and most successful campgrounds in the country, and I don't think I've seen a campground website yet that has consistent, accurate information on all the topics I care about. So step number one, I think, is making sure the information is there. And then step number two is figuring out how to reach your unique customer through things, whether it's email, whether it's text. Maybe you don't want to allow self-check-in, depending on the demographic of your customer. So I don't think there's an easy solution to this one, but I think it's another good difference between the industries that's worth highlighting. Yes?
Just a quick question, somewhere in the middle of your presentation, you draw a statistic, and, again, I know it's not trying to specific, you said something like, OTA was 20% of the bookings in the industry, or, what did you say exactly?
So in the hotel industry, it's not uncommon for a hotel to get 20+% of its overall occupancy or from OTAs. And I read one quote recently from a hotel chain that stated of its leisure business, close to 70% was coming from OTAs. My point was that the camping industry, that percentage is much lower. I don't have the data from HipCamp or from Spot Tonight or from others. I only have the data from Campspot to say that we account for 5%, and so 5% is a long way from 70%. I think I can do one or two more. I'll go back there and then right up here.
Me?
Yes.
Okay, so what are some of the most popular forms of revenue management that Campspot's seeing as well as some of your other competitors? Or like, what are you guys
Yeah.
seeing the most?
So I think the top ones would be first dynamic pricing, so having pricing adjust based on demand. Second, and there's debate about whether this would be considered a revenue management strategy. I think it is. Utilizing add-ons and ancillary revenue opportunities such as site blocking fees, charging the appropriate amount for extra person charges, and offering things at the time of purchase like cart rental. I think that's another key one. And then distribution, to the conversation we just had. Revenue management strategy and distribution strategy go hand in hand, and so campgrounds are increasingly looking for ways to feature their campgrounds with the right customers. There's a number of others, and I'm probably forgetting some that I lay out in the white paper, and to the gentleman who asked for it, I'm going to put that on the screen in just a moment, but those are a few that come to mind initially. Let's do one more over here.
You had mentioned more aggressive cancellation policies. Do you have some suggestions that might look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fairly common in this industry that within 14 days to have the reservation be non-refundable. I think it depends a lot on the local market and what your competitors are doing, but I think if you ask most hotel operators, and certainly most hotel chains, they regret the slippery slope of making their cancellation policies more and more flexible to where now there's probably too much flexibility. So my advice on cancellation policies are hold the line and probably keep cancellation policies and refund policies as stringent as you can, as long as it's competitive with your peer group. We're also looking at Campspot at offering stuff like insurance type products, so that guests, if they want to pay extra, they might be able to cancel for any reason. We have a product called the Sensible Weather Guarantee, where if they pay a little extra and it rains during their stay, they get a refund. Those are a few examples of where I think you can kind of flip the cancellation refund story on its head and say, let's assume that reservations are non-cancelable, and then give the guest an upcharge if they want more flexibility. So I am at time, so I just want to finish things off here on a few ways that we can connect and keep the conversation going. Campspot does have a booth in the expo hall. One really cool thing we're doing, we didn't talk a lot about data in this presentation, but at Campspot's booth tonight and tomorrow, we're going to be offering customized market intelligence reports based on your local geography and your campground type. So where are you pricing versus your competitors? what are campgrounds like yours getting in terms of occupancy versus competitors. Totally free, you don't need to be a Campspot customer. We just think it's a valuable industry service. If you do want to learn more about some of the features in Campspot that we brushed on, we're doing a fireside demo tomorrow at 1 p.m. Here's the link to the white paper. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn or email me, connect with Campspot, join our mailing list, etc. We'll leave some note cards up at the front for those that don't want to take a picture or write down that very long URL. In closing, I just want to say thank you so much. This is exactly the kind of discussion I wanted to spark. I don't have all the answers. I don't think anybody in this room has all the answers, but I think we need to start with the premise that this is a topic that needs discussion. There are problems that need to be solved, and solutions to these problems, evolution and changes to this industry, I really want to come from within the industry, taking as guidance and learnings, things that other industries have done, but remembering that our industry is unique, it's special, and that's a good thing. Thank you.